a way that's respectful. And, you know, I have to confess to some degree of schadenfreude when the televangelist gets, oh, this, do I have to got that? Or, you know, when, you know, the televangelist has a big downfall or something like that. And so, but, you know, Jesus cautions us against, you know, judging. And so how do we navigate this in a respectful way? That's part of the challenge. And so on the other hand, I mean, I think people like me who care about Yeshua of Nazareth as a historical person should have some say in what we mean collectively by Christianity. And it shouldn't just be up to the evangelicals to define it any way they want to. So I think that's why, in spite of all these perils, it's worthwhile for us to engage in this kind of a conversation. Now, so in my youth, I was a Catholic, and I was a much more conventional religious view than I do today. But I was never an evangelical. Now, the subtitle of this book is How White Evangelicals Corrupted a Faith and Fractured a Nation. So, pretty accusatory. So what I'm going to do is, to a large extent, I'm going to let the author explain this rather than doing it in my own voice. She has this nifty Jesus and John Wayne book club. If any of you chased down the links that I sent out to the author's website, she has a set of provocative questions and some videos that she recorded to set these things up. And I think it does a good job. Now, I've had to, I suspect possibly nobody actually has read the book besides me. I don't know. I recommend it though. Oh, somehow.
I started reading.
Oh, cool, yeah. And I really recommend it. Maybe after you see this, you'll want to print out and read it. But I've modified the questions a little bit to set them up for folks who haven't read the book. But I think the general issues are just broad enough and familiar enough that we all should be able to engage with that. And also some of the videos that she has, I think, capture not just, you know, facts about the book or something like that, but it's her motivation. Where was she at? Why was she doing this? What was her state of mind in approaching the subject? And I think that's quite important, actually. So I'm going to use that, and I'm going to use that website to sort of structure a discussion with a few modifications, as I said. Now, for certain theological reasons, the church in which she grew up, the conservative Protestant church, did not define itself as evangelical, but she was very much immersed in the broader culture, which to a large degree, as we'll hear, defines what it means to be evangelical. So she's closer to an insider to this.
Yeah.
And you'll see at the end, she's not, hooray, I kicked their butts, you know, she's not triumphalist about this. She's very sad, very, very discouraged that, you know, the trajectory that things are going. And so I think that's an important point of view to take on all this material. Yeah, go ahead.
It's interesting. What I read so far in the book, I didn't realize that I was immersed in evangelical culture growing up. I didn't know that that was a label for it, like all around me, all the, you know, focus on the family, all these names that came up. It's like, oh, I had no idea, like, that my whole, you know, my family and everybody was really into that. I was like, oh, so that's kind of where the roots, it was really interesting to kind of see that.
Well, yeah, and so
in a completely different way.
So the very first thing that we want to talk about is, Rick, is that the fact that thing is on the screen there? Do we need to cancel out of that, or is that going out?
I'll fix it.
Oh, okay, cool. So the very first thing I want her to talk about is what is an evangelical? Exactly the point that you mentioned. That's where we're going first. So I'm gonna unmute my mic so that you guys can hear the audio that I'm about to show.
Was she saying something about it?
Yeah, it was such a weird.
Okay, so let's go. Are we? Oops, hold on. Hold on. Pause. What happened? Oof, what's going on? Where'd my? I thought I did. Wait a second. I unmuted, and what happened? Where is it? What's happened? Zoom. What's going on? Oh, here it is. It moves it around in different places depending on what mode I'm in. Is that?
So you click on that one to enlarge it.
Yeah.
So just click.
Yeah.
There.
So it's unmuted. Okay. Oh. Yeah. No, wait a minute. Share screen.
So then you click.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Then go to advanced.
Wait a minute. No, we shouldn't have to do that. We already shared
good.
sound. Yeah. We already did that. So this shouldn't be necessary. Right. Share. I thought we didn't need that many clicks. Sorry. Okay. So full screen play. Finally. Are we hearing the audio? Rick, not hearing the audio.
What do we mean by
This is me. This is.
Now, this is not an easy concept to get to the bottom of. In all honesty, when I first started researching and writing Jesus and John
Sorry,
Wayne,
this is the first time we've done all of these pieces.
Try to
just kind of
turn up
fall
the
back
volume on your
on
computer.
the common academic definition of evangelicalism.
This is.
I can hear it on Zoom.
No, but this is no. He said that should stay muted because that's this. What I want is this.
That historian
okay.
David Bebbington came up with
There
in
we
order to capture evangelicalism.
Okay. Here we go. All right. Okay. One more time. Yeah. All right. Sorry. We did this all in the dress rehearsal and it still didn't come out as smoothly as we would have liked. Okay. So now, what does it mean to be an evangelical? Play.
Jumping right in, what do we mean by evangelical? Now, this is not an easy concept to get to the bottom of. In all honesty, when I first started researching and then writing Jesus and John Wayne, I had every intention to just kind of fall back on the common academic definition of evangelical. For at least a generation, scholars of evangelicalism have been looking to a handy definition that historian David Bebbington came up with in order to capture evangelicalism. And this is a 4-point definition, so it came to be known as the Bebbington Quadrilateral, which essentially defines evangelical as somebody who upholds the authority of the scriptures, who places a great emphasis on conversion, personal conversion, also the centrality of the cross, and activism. So they're going to act out of these faith convictions. The more I researched this topic, the more I looked at conservative white American evangelicalism, the more I realized that this definition wasn't enough. It didn't really capture what I was seeing. To begin with, there are a lot of Christians in America and elsewhere who would fit all of these boxes who do not identify as evangelical. And this is especially the case in the United States with Black Protestants. Who uphold these theological beliefs, but do not, in fact, identify as evangelicals. And there are some reasons for that. I also was drawing from my own experience here. As a professor, I encounter a lot of evangelical students. And what has struck me in recent years, and not so recent years, is how little theology many students actually grasp. Which doesn't mean that their faith isn't important to them, but it occurred to me that there is something more to religious identity and to religious belief even than stated theological beliefs. The more I looked into this, the more I understood. Survey data bears this out, that a remarkable number of evangelicals actually hold beliefs that would qualify them as heretics. And there's just a lot of theological illiteracy out there. So I started to think, what does define evangelicalism? How do you know if you're an evangelical? What does it mean to be an evangelical if theology isn't that important, or theology alone isn't that important? And it occurred to me that evangelicalism is a culture. It is a culture, it is a group of people, it is networks, it is alliances. But really, when it comes down to it, it is a culture defined by consumption, by consumerism. So, an evangelical is somebody who maybe grew up in a house where James Dobson was played on the radio every single day. Maybe you grew up listening to Christian contemporary music, watching Christian television, right? Reading Christianity Today or World Magazine, participating in Bible studies, reading popular Christian books, shopping at Christian bookstores, right? These are the things that I think really define evangelicalism in the United States today. And once that kind of clicked for me, I had a new way of kind of defining evangelicalism and who is inside and who is outside. So rather than suggesting that somebody is not a real evangelical if they don't go to church enough times in a month, or if they can't articulate the 4 points of evangelicalism, instead, I came to understand that evangelicalism can be understood in terms of how deeply one is immersed in this evangelical culture. Some people are all in, right? Some people really only consume Christian media. Some people really spend much of their weeks moving in this evangelical subculture. Others might dabble in it, and they may have many other sources of information and spiritual formation. And so that's really how I came to understand evangelicalism in this book. Then there's also the matter of whether or not I identify as an evangelical. And this too is a little bit complicated. I don't currently identify as an evangelical. Growing up, I didn't really think of myself as an evangelical. I grew up in a confessional community, so Christian Reformed church in a small town, Dutch ethnic immigrant culture. At the same time, I will say that I was immersed in aspects of this evangelical subculture. Growing up, I pretty much only listened to Christian contemporary music. We had one bookstore in town, and that was a Christian bookstore. And so all of my graduation gifts and if I'm spending money, could be spent there buying Christian merchandise and little wall plaques and figurines and Christian books. I had a sweatshirt that said Messiah and El Shaddai on it, and all in pastels. This was the 80s. So yes, I was certainly influenced by this cultural evangelicalism. And then I went off, left that small town, went on to study religion, had a bit of distance, I think, for a while from that subculture. But in ensuing years, I think that the evangelical, kind of cultural evangelicalism has made deep inroads across American Christianity into denominations, into the mainline, into my own ethnic confessional community. So that now I think many of the people who are growing up in my hometown are essentially evangelical. And many of them identify as white evangelicals today. So it's a complicated kind of personal background. I never fully identified as an evangelical, and so I've never felt the need to reject that, declare myself an ex-evangelical. At the same time, I did grow up in in a community that was influenced by many of these developments, by James Dobson's focus on the family, by many of the books that I write about in Jesus and John Wayne.
So that's what her book cover looks like if you haven't seen it yet. As I said, I recommend it very highly. Okay, so we're going to stop screen sharing. Oops. Oh, yeah, you were screen sharing. Stop screen sharing. Hello? Keep doing. Oh, I got to escape first. Well, it doesn't have to be purchased. It's on her website. It is on her website. Oh, we got to minimize. We got to minimize that first.
Yes.
Now we can stop sharing.
It's just when that invite is open, so go.
What? Stop share? Yeah. Okay. Got it. Okay. All right. So, okay. So that's. I think that's an important context of what you're doing.
You're muted.
Oh,
No,
We can hear you, but we didn't hear.
no,
they're hearing me to hear you.
they're hearing me. No, they're hearing me through the room mic. Yes. So we're good. Yeah, but.
Technology's one.
There's too many options. Yeah, you guys can see me. You don't need to see me on the screen there. So Rick, are people at home seeing me or seeing whatever's on my computer screen right now?
You're not,
They're saying whatever you see on the TV screen.
Okay,
Right.
cool. Okay.
and so you're not sharing right
Right. Yeah. Okay. All right. So anyway, I think that's important context to say, well, who are we including in all of this? And to say that it's not a theological definition. It's not even who goes to church. It's a much broader phenomenon. Well, how did that get to be? Now, one thing that, this might be a generation, I don't know if this is a generational thing. She's a lot younger than I am. Or if it's just a cultural thing, like I was an Irish Catholic growing up, I wasn't an evangelical, so I didn't encounter a lot of stuff that's recent. Did, right? So I wonder, she's got a little list in her book of some of the things that she means by popular evangelical culture. So here we go. And I'm wondering, does this resonate for you personally? Are you? Because a lot of this stuff does not connect much for me. So I'm kind of an outsider. So they've raised children with the help of James Dobson's Focus on the Family radio programs. They're grown up watching VeggieTales cartoons. They rocked out to Amy Grant or the Newsboys or DC Talk. They learned about purity before they learned about sex, and they have silver rings to prove it. They watched The Passion of the Christ, Soul Surfer, or the latest Kirk Cameron film with their youth group. They attended Promise Keepers with guys from church and read Wild at Heart in small groups. They've learned more from Pat Robertson, John Piper, Joyce Meyer, and the Gospel Coalition than they have from their pastors' Sunday sermons. So, for the folks in this room, raise your hand if do those things resonate for you? Do they mean something? Okay. Yeah. So you understand this better than I do, in many ways.
So far, what's wrong with those things? Though? That's what
Okay, no, we're at the point of what defines what is evangelical, who's included, what are we referring to? So that's the starting point, right? All right, so now I want to read another little snippet from the book here. About how did we get to where we are? Because evangelicalism has not always been defined as pop culture. That's a new thing. It wasn't that way 100 years ago. And so how did we get here? So this is a little bit of that history. By the early 20th century, Christians recognized that they had a masculinity problem. Unable to shake the sense that Christianity had a less than masculine feel, many blamed the faith itself, or at least the feminization of Victorian Christianity. which privileged gentility, restraint, and emotive response to the gospel message. But American masculinity, too, had recently undergone dramatic changes, contributing to this sense of unease. Throughout much of the 19th century, when most men made a living by farming or otherwise working with their hands or by owning small businesses, masculinity seemed more of a given. During this time, Christian manhood entailed hard work and thrift, and also the ability to exhibit proper gentlemanly restraint. Self-denial, after all, was a useful virtue for entrepreneurial businessmen and industrious workers. But by the 1890s, this model of manly restraint had begun to falter. And the shift away from the farm and the sole proprietor store in town or whatever, and into urbanization, industrialization, all of these things. And suddenly a man was not this brave individual, out riding the range and all that kind of stuff, but he instead was, a cog in this big machine. And what does that mean? What does it mean now to be a man if you're a piece of a big machine in a mill or something? These things kind of challenge this definition of manhood and autonomy and individuality. White, native-born Protestant men began to assert a new kind of masculinity, a rougher, tougher masculinity, nothing less than the fate of the nation, even the future of white Christian civilization appeared to be at stake. No one advanced this new American masculinity with more gusto than Theodore Roosevelt. I've seen a program on PBS called The Roosevelts that's really great, and it talks about Teddy Roosevelt and this sort of hyper-masculine image that he concocted. He was kind of a nerd when he was young. When he wanted to get into public life, he cultivated this hyper-masculine persona. So how, if we could start to, I'm just setting it up a whole bunch here, but we start to get into a little more conversation. How does that kind of, Teddy Roosevelt hypermasculinity, how does that conform to or deviate from the traditional definition of Christianity, the traditional Christian versions?
How does it compare to the life of Jesus, for example?
For example, yeah. And so, any thoughts?
Well, aside from the incident of driving the money changers from the temple, there aren't a lot of cases that I can come to mind. My mind, Christ being a tough guy.
And there is a line that says, "I come not for peace, but with the sword." There's one. There's like, do like anything, but the book of Revelations. I think the book of Revelations is not inspired scripture. Okay, I think that was a mistake. I mean, there's a lot of, Thomas' Gospel didn't make the cut, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene didn't make the cut, lots of things didn't make the cut. I don't know why Revelation did.
So if you focus primarily on that book, and that kind of guides your theology, then yeah, it's going to be very different from what other people focus on.
Right.
And there's all these books and all these shows and lots of televangelists focusing on a lot of that Revelations type end of the world, apocalypse. Yeah.
So I have the impression that modern scholars that reinterpreted Revelation have been all about Rome as a terrible, corrupt force that needed to be overthrown. And so it's all somewhat obscured, anti-Roman screed.
Well, apparently, I've also, I haven't read exhaustively on this, but apparently it was kind of this apocalyptic, there was a literature phenomenon, in 100 AD or whatever. It was just something, it was Star Wars, it was, it was a literary form of that day and age. And so we in some cases, we may not understand the context, right? What worries me in the context of this book is revealing is that the fact that scholars know this, the fact that we now know a lot more about the historical Yeshua of Nazareth than we did, 100 years ago, to cultural evangelicals who are all about this kind of definition of what it means to be a Christian. They don't care about, what those academics say, that really happened, or when this particular gospel was written and why, how it differs from this other one, and things like that. Does that matter anymore?
Yeah, so when I heard these scholars, he asked the question, what book would you have added to my New Testament? They say, well, first of all, I would have known it should not have been there. That's Revelation. I mean, I heard that from many religious scholars.
Okay.
He said that, and it doesn't ought not to be there.
It's a different Jesus. It's not. It doesn't match the Jesus of the Synoptic Gospels. It is a little bit in John. I mean, that the John Gospel and the epistles associated with the name John, and Revelation is also associated with that name John. Doesn't mean they're all written by the same person, but I mean, there's maybe hints of it there that in the John Gospel, maybe Jesus is God in a man suit, not completely human. Does he even suffer in the John Gospel? Does Jesus actually suffer on the cross, or does he just display himself on the cross? I mean, there's a lot of ways in which he's just a God in disguise that you don't get the feeling he's a flesh and blood human. At least in me, that's the way I can kind of see a distinction between the John Gospel and the Synoptics.
Yeah. To get back to your tough guy, why do the evangelicals seem to show this as being tough or not? I think it has to do with the fact that evangelicals generally, everything is black and white. This is the way it is, period. You either accept the word, you accept the Bible as it is, or you don't, period. And so that's maybe potentially has added fuel to their belief that this is the answer, period.
We can't have two versions.
Yeah.
We can't have a diversity of views.
No, it's one way. And maybe that's what has contributed to this tough guy, certainly.
If we've got to pick one or the other, we're going to pick that.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a very tight circle within that culture for reaffirming all of that. So they feel very confident, very certain about what they're doing. And so it's really insular. It's like you can throw anything at it and it just bounces right off because
Who cares what the academics say?
this is, who we
We
are,
know.
as opposed to asking questions like, what does this mean? And really kind of trying to interpret it and being thoughtful about it. It's just very much like, we know what the answer is and we are going to go forward with it.
We don't care when was that scripture written.
Right.
Was it written the day after? Was the Sermon on the Mount, was that like someone taking dictation back there, or was that written, in 70 AD, 40 years after the events? Things like that. I think matter. I think it's important for us to engage that way. But so let's get started. So there's World War I. Oh, there's a really interesting story here about World War I. Just a little snippet of this, but it's very counterintuitive. I didn't know any of this until I read this book about masculinity, war, hooray for war. Who was in World War I? Who was saying hooray for war? Let's go fight a war, and who was saying I ain't so sure? During the First World War, competing visions of muscular Christianity were caught up in a frenzied militarism. Liberal Protestants embraced the conflict as the war to end all wars, a means of extending democracy and Christianity across the globe. Among fundamentalists, the response was much more complicated than the flag waving we might have done on Sunday morning. For some, an unwillingness to characterize America as a Christian nation. Fundamentalists did not want to call America a Christian nation, and that restrained their enthusiasm for the war. A Christian nation, according to the editors at the King's Business, a monthly publication for the Bible Institute of Los Angeles, would be one that has accepted Christ as its Savior and its Lord in all aspects of governance, in politics, commerce, and international relations. But such a nation does not exist on earth, never has existed, and never will exist until our Lord comes again. what they had to say on something. For this reason, patriotism was no virtue. A Christian's loyalty belonged to God's kingdom, not to the nation. In a move that seems almost incomprehensible today, liberal Protestants pounced on this ambivalence, denouncing conservatives as un-American, an un-American faith, and labeling their lack of patriotism as a threat to national security. Fundamentalists responded by pointing out the origins of liberals' higher critical theology, which came from the Germans, German intellectual circles. So we can dismiss all that crap right off. So this is, I didn't know this. I thought there's a tendency for us to think that the way things are is the way things always were. And it wasn't. When the war came to a close, no amount of patriotism could obscure the fact that it had been fought at a great cost and with little apparent gain. Roosevelt's model of masculinity had been found wanting. The war, it seemed, had presented Americans with the horror of having myths about blood and fire and mutilation and blindness come true. For liberal Protestant internationalists, the disillusionment was especially keen. Sherby Beatty, a leading liberal Protestant proponent of the war, expressed dismay at his own pro-war activism. I believed it was a war to end war, to protect womanhood, to destroy militarism and autocracy, and to make a new world fit for heroes to live in, he confessed. The carnage and horrors of warfare put an end to all. In the wake of this disillusionment, the more militant model of Christian masculinity lost much of its luster. So it hasn't always been thus. And who's on which team has not always been this way. The idea that, I mean, of course, we're all no Southern, statistically speaking, hardly anybody in the South would ever vote for the Republican because that was the party of Lincoln, and who the hell would ever vote for the party of Lincoln? So this realignment, this redefinition of what it means to be a Christian and what it means to be a patriot, and are they the same thing? Are they two different things? Has changed a lot over time. It has not ever been thus.
Question.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Woodrow Wilson was elected for the war.
Yeah.
And only because of pressure, because the Germans sunk our vessels.
Right, yeah.
And whatever, and we're working with Mexico against us.
Yeah, they intercepted that cable.
Literally was kind of, that's my view. When you talk about Wilson and whether he would think, what he would
I can't really speak to him. I don't really know about that. How he, I mean, I know you like Birth of a Nation, and I'm not a big fan of this for that reason, but yeah, I can't really say about that. And any other thoughts on this? Yeah. So now in the 1940s, John Wayne and Ronald Reagan were making movies while George H.W. Bush and Jimmy Carter joined the military. Which of these would later be viewed as more manly? The warriors or the people who pretended to be warriors? So I'm going to read one little snippet here again. Should I mark these spots? To evangelicals, Carter had been a disappointment on all counts. They denounced the Carter administration for siding with feminists and for wooing the homosexual vote. To make matters worse, Carter had overseen what conservatives perceived to be the stunning decline of American strength. On his first day in office, he had pardoned draft evaders. He agreed to hand over the Panama Canal and signed a nuclear arms control agreement. He allowed the Sandinistas to gain control of Nicaragua and enabled the overthrow of the Shah of Iran. The kidnapping of 52 American hostages at the US Embassy in Tehran was an especially humiliating blow. Meanwhile, the president was mired in a crisis of confidence and seemed unable to lead. Not the macho, my way or the highway. So he seemed to be unable to lead America out of this mess he made. On top of all this, he wore cardigans and he smiled way too much. Even the national media proclaimed Carter a wimp, and the label stuck. The guy who was in the nuclear navy patrolling our for American evangelicals who had placed patriarchal power at the heart of their cultural and political identity, Carter's win factor was particularly infuriating and their sense of betrayal acute. After all, Carter was supposed to be one of them. He was a born-again evangelical Southerner, a Sunday school teacher, and they had helped elect him in order to restore the nation's firm moral footing in the aftermath of Watergate. He had even served a stint as a naval submariner, yet it was clear that he was not one of them on issues that mattered most. For the strong masculine leadership the country so urgently required, they would need to look elsewhere.
He also admitted having lust in his heart. Masculinity.
And more than that, it was in Playboy magazine.
Oh,
So Adlai Stevenson was excluded from the possibility of being president by many conservatives because he was divorced. A man who can't run his own personal life, how can he possibly run the country? Oh, right, he was divorced. It didn't matter. There were times when infidelity was something worth impeaching a president over. And then it was something that didn't matter. So these priorities, these issues shifted dramatically over time.
There's a strong political correlation.
Of course, yeah.
Couldn't hear you, what?
A strong political correlation with,
All the people that he mentioned are Democrats.
no, because
Stevenson, Carter.
yeah. So Democrats have to be held to this exalted moral standard, right? Yeah. So there's interesting stuff going on here.
Don't you think a lot of this is coming from the power? For people wanting power and like religious rights, you know what I mean? It's like they're trying to mobilize, and a lot of evangelicals, frankly, as you said, are kind of sheepish. They kind of just follow the lead, and so when these people go out and say, homosexuals are bad, you can't accept them in church, they accept that.
Well, but if it were simply a matter of that, these people are sheep, they'll follow you wherever you lead them. You could say, love those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. When someone strikes you on your one cheek, turn them offer them the other. If they press you in the service for a while, go with them too. If they take your coat, give them your shirt. You could say all that stuff. So I think it's not just that I'll go wherever you lead.
Well, look, the whole thing with like the children at the border, Jesus said, bring the children to me. There's a lot of things that are in the Bible that they don't really accept. And I think it has, to some degree, in my opinion, it has to do with the power structure and the fact that since evangelicals, conservative Christians, whatever the group is that runs this, and I don't, I'm not saying it's united, but I think that there's a big pressure that they just want to control. They want to control women. They don't want to have abortion. They want to, control who's in the country so they can get the money instead of the children that are in need.
But they don't want their ancestors not to come to the country.
Right.
That wouldn't be good. No. Immigration was good then, not good now. Right.
And the powers that be seem to be really good at kind of instilling that threat and that fear issue which reinforced that us versus them feeling. And so it's just like, okay, there are these people suffering at the border, but instead of compassion or empathy, you actually kind of like, you see them as a threat. So it's, and it, with all the consumption that we're talking about. Just reinforce that.
I think, I mean, I agree that fear is a significant motivating factor in all this. But what is the real fear? Are people afraid that they're going to lose their job picking strawberries in Oxnard to an illegal immigrant who wants that job? That's what they're afraid of. But there is a fear, I think.
They're afraid they're gonna get lost. They're gonna get Social Security and not paying it or whatever.
But I mean, fear is a more personal thing. I mean, that's policy and where our tax dollars spend, stuff like that. But I don't think that's genuine fear. But to me,
It's more like a generalized.
I don't matter anymore.
Yeah, it's not like not an immediate kind of fear, but it's just an overall feeling like everything is so bad and everything is falling apart. And, it's just like, and then we've got this huge problem and this huge problem. We can't solve it all, and so we've got to protect ourselves. And that's kind of my understanding as how.
And don't you think that's kind of how Revelation ties into this? Because Revelation is a book that basically you have no power, but the 4 horses of the apocalypse come and all the stuff that happens during that book. You're out of control.
Well, what scares me most about the book of Revelation is it says the world has to go, the path to heaven is through hell. The way to get to heaven is to go to hell first, destroy everything, and kill all the bad people, and then all the good people will have a great life. It's like, how's that ever worked? We tried that in World War I. We tried that in World War II. We tried that all kinds of times. It doesn't work. So I've said this before, but I think that the Lord's Prayer is marching orders. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as in heaven, is not God, please do this. Please jump into history and fix everything. If God were going to do that, not the day nor the hour, nor the decade, the century, the millennium. I mean, if that was going to happen, why didn't it happen 2,000 years ago? God, in my opinion, doesn't do that way. It's our marching orders to bring about the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven. How do we do that? Food and forgiveness. Give us our daily bread and forgive us our sins. That's the recipe for bringing about the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven. Not have a holy war between the forces of good and the forces of evil, and the forces of good will destroy all the evil. Sorry, I'm trying to take this sermon. It's supposed to be a discussion. Okay, so let's see how we can time. One thing that, I think I want to talk about this one. This is not strictly evangelical masculinity, but it is very much, I think, why, as you were saying, why are people so drawn to this? Why is it so easy to get people to buy into this? And I think that, at least for men, I think adrenaline can be a dangerous drug. And the thing that kind of was a slap in the face for me in that thing was, there's all those movies by, the John Wayne and all of his descendants, Dirty Harry and all those fun things. But the one that really, I don't watch a lot of this, but one that I did watch, and it was a rude awakening for me, was a thing called Death Wish, Charles Bronson. He was a nice, mild-mannered, liberal, whatever he was, the character was. And his wife and daughter were raped and murdered by these horrible creatures. And so he goes nuts, and he goes out. This is New York City in the 70s, right? So everybody thought it was a hellscape, but so he would go out every night into Central Park at 1 a.m. with a gun and wait for someone to bug him so he could shoot them. And he just did this over and over and over again, and it was making headlines and stuff like that. And the most pathological part of all of it to me was the end. He gets injured in one of these attacks, and he's in the hospital. And rumor has hit the press that maybe he's the vigilante. Cop comes into his hospital room, shows him his gun, and says, "I'm going to drop this in the river. We're not going to talk." And then he leaves, and the people outside the room the news people are saying, "Was that him? Is that him? Is that this one?" No, he's still out there. He's still out there. So he's murdered a whole bunch of people. But these were good murders. So he's off the hook. The police are on board with this. And, and this is hooray.
And so are the viewers.
So the thing that I realized is this is poison. I mean, maybe not for everyone. I mean, I have no problem, drinking alcohol and, and I can not drink alcohol for a month or two, and it doesn't matter. It's not a problem. But for me, this stuff would just be poison. Because the hyper testosterone, hyper adrenalized, kick ass, kill the bastards, that kind of stuff. They say you are what you eat, but to an even greater extent, you are what you think about. And it is a thrill, it's a rush to feel this adrenaline pumping and all this kind of stuff. And it's so easy to gain people this way. It's easy to write movies like that, and in a way, like the Incredible Hulk is this too. It's like, I'm a mild-mannered person, but don't piss me off, or I'll turn into this monster and destroy the room. So it's righteous anger.
This is what's happening with all this stuff about the child pedophilia gangs of Democratic politicians. That, believe it or not, huge millions of people in this country just love reading this stuff and seeing these YouTubes, all these testimonials about things that never happened.
Because it's
so that they can
justifies hate. Hate can be fun. Hate can be addictive. It's terrifying. And so when I had that experience, in my teens, whatever it was, it's like, I'm not watching this stuff anymore. There were 3 more death wishes, I guess. I never saw any of them. I did see one of the Rockies, the first one, but I never watched the rest of them. I mean, I think it's an addictive experience. I mean, things not to be chemicals to be addictive. I mean, gambling can be addictive. And this, I think this behavior is very addictive. And I think if you get hooked on that mindset, I think it's pathological. I think it's
talk more about Rocky.
Sure, go ahead.
No, I had the same thing. I watched the first Rocky, but nothing thereafter.
Yeah. I'm talking a lot. Go ahead and talk.
There's certainly appeal to them. I mean, the media, Hollywood or whatever, has played a role in this. They're satisfying a need, they would say. But it's stuck in the mind, people don't come back to reality.
Right. But I wonder to what degree Rocky was kind of a fantasy version of the last Frazier-Ali fight. I'm not a boxing fan, but that was such a cultural phenomenon that it was hard to avoid. Well, and the third time, PBS had a program about Ali recently.
Yeah.
And so I remembered some of this stuff. But the third time that they fought, they just about killed each other. I mean, finally, in the last round, Frazier didn't answer the bell. But they had just about beat each other to death. And so why do people crave this? I mean, we don't have gladiators killing each other in the Roman Colosseum anymore, but Go ahead.
No, I don't know. Like when I'm with at my dad's house, he goes from watching the televangelist to boxing. And that's
But what that says is there's not a contrast, there's not a distinction. They can imagine Jesus, the ultimate fighter.
that thrill of seeing a winner, or this just like that adrenaline rush of like power and strength, and I think it kind of goes back to like that savior complex, like wanting a savior, someone who's going to come in to save us all, kind of thing. And that's what we're waiting for. That's who we must support. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, the Jews were waiting for somebody like that. You know, back in the day, the Jews were actually waiting for somebody like that. So it kind of ties into that. But also, I think everybody has had experiences in their life where they feel like they're the underdog and they didn't get a fair shake. And so I think that they relate, and it allows them to sort of vent that, you know, okay, Rocky wins. He was totally not the one who would have, but he won. And
No,
they
no.
had pleasure.
No, he didn't win in the first movie. He did not win. He did not win.
Okay, well,
But the trouble is he didn't get knocked out. It was a win by a decision. And in the last scene, it's like Apollo Creed says, "Ain't gonna be no rematch." And Rocky Balboa said, "Go on," you know, and the decision went to the champ. But then afterwards, people were saying it shouldn't have, you know, and so then suddenly there's this whole thing. Have another movie because there had to be a rematch.
well, then people relate to the fact that they fought really hard and they should have won and they didn't.
I went the distance.
Yeah.
I just want to go the distance. You know, I mean, that was his thing, right? But this, the thing is, as horrible as a boxing match might be, 15 rounds long or whatever, it's over in a day. Those are real problems. You can't get something in a day. You can't just beat up the bad guys and have everything work out. The world is so much more complicated than, you know, fight or flight. Oh, the bear is trying to eat me. I successfully threw the spear. The bear is dead now. Now I get to eat the bear. Good. Life is good. I mean, the world is so much more complicated now. One more thing. Actually, we've got another whole episode on this to explore more of the stuff she wrote. But one more thing that I just want to mention, again, this is from a PBS program, Ken Burns, Vietnam. One of the veterans said something that I thought was so moving. I think it ties into this whole hyper-adrenalized male thing. And why it has to exist is evolutionarily. He said, in Vietnam, I never murdered a human being. I offed gooks right and left. I never murdered a human being. And so that's the mental gymnastics that a soldier has to do in order to fight a war. You have to make those you are going to kill subhuman. I don't watch any of that stuff with zombies and all that stuff, vampires and all that stuff, because it's like, well, that may look like a human, but don't worry your little head about it. Hack it to pieces with an axe because it's not really a human. Evolutionarily, I think I know where that comes from. There was a time in human civilization where people probably got confronted with that decision a lot more often than we do today. But when you fight a war, you have to play that game. You have to say there's them and there's us, and it's okay to kill them. How do you fight the war otherwise? How does civilization survive if it refuses to fight it?
So, in World War I, American propaganda showing Germans killing babies, you know, and making it clear they have no scruples, they're bad people.
Right. We would never do that, but that's them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To justify, okay, it's reasonable for you to shoot. In fact, you gotta do it quickly because he's gonna kill you. So it's who kills first. It's a survivor, and so you've gotta have it in your brain already preset.
And I mean, I had an uncle with us, but my mother's youngest brother was involved with his amphibious assault on Guam. I never recovered from that. Maybe it was battle fatigue or shell shock or whatever they called it back then, but it was traumatic stress disorder. And he was like waking up in the middle of the night and breaking windows and stuff. He was reliving that trauma endlessly. I mean, we have an enormous debt to the men who, at that place at that time, had to do that. But it's not something to say, to glorify. It's like, hey, hooray, let's have more warriors. We've got a lot less warriors. Like 1% of the American population now is in the military. It's a good thing. Being in the military, going through that hell is not a good thing. You know, bodies don't always survive, or pieces of bodies don't always survive, and pieces of brains and souls don't always survive.
And armies don't always.
Oh, yeah, I mean, yeah. So there's this idea of a warrior culture, hooray for warriors, let's all be warriors. It's like, sounds great when you're just playing it in a movie like Reagan or John Wayne, but those who lived through it, you know, my dad, my uncle, or, you know, or George H.W. Bush might not be quite as jazzed about war as people who don't play that. Sorry, I'm very preachy, but
I'd say like when you're touching on trauma, is just, that's what makes this whole thing so complicated, just because many people experience trauma in different ways. And so it kind of what they're searching for to heal, you know, they're looking for someone to save them or someone who represents them, or some like how they respond to authority, or anything as simple answers, something that kind of makes them feel safe, you know. And so I think that's kind of why, you know, this culture has done a really good job of providing a space for people to feel like they belong somewhere. So especially for someone who feels like an outsider, if they don't belong here, you have a space that's like, okay, I know for sure this and this and this, and yeah, that's what's going to get me to heaven, or this is, you know, this is where I belong, and I know that I'm righteous here. So it's kind of tricky to kind of make little inroads. And then the whole thing with like making excuses, and I hear that a lot too. Just they say, well, nobody can be perfect. Nobody can be like Jesus. So like, but then it doesn't mean that, in my mind, it doesn't mean that you should do the opposite. You should get so fine. Just, you know, protect your heart above all else. I don't remember the scripture on that, but you know, guard your heart above all else. So, because you know, even though we can't solve all the world's problems, guard your heart. You still have that softness and kindness for other people. You know, you would hope.
One of the reasons I'm here instead of the Catholic Church now is because it really bothered me. There was a rote prayer in the Mass. You alone are the Holy One. You alone are the Lord. You alone are the Most High Jesus Christ. All this alone. But Jesus told his disciples to say, "It's our Father who art in heaven, not my Father who art in heaven." I deify Jesus just about the same amount as I deify us. I don't buy the idea that he was not one of us. I think he was one of us. I think he can be emulated. I don't think he had magic powers. I don't think he could switch gravity off. I think he was one of us, and therefore we let ourselves off the hook if we said he's God in a man suit. He could turn gravity on and off. He could, you know, make matter appear out of thin air. Then we let ourselves off the hook, because then we don't have to be him. But if we say the miracle of loaves and fishes was about generosity, it was about giving. It's about there is enough if we only realize there is enough. It's not matter appears out of thin air. If you pray right, stuff will fall out of the sky. It's not the message. That's the wrong message. All right, not so humble opinion. So there's, I'd like to maybe close with one more of her video clips about mainstream or fringe. This also got into her agonizing, should I even write this book? We have 9 minutes. 9 minutes. That'll work, great. Yeah, okay, so let's try to do this more smoothly than last time. Okay. Yeah, so we want to go. We've done a bunch of that stuff. Mainstream or fringe. So now I need to share my. Oh, this guy. Bring this up. Okay, so I'm going to unmute me. Hopefully this will work. I unmute me. No, I don't want to. Yeah, unmute this.
And then, oh crap. Hold on.
Yeah, because we need to, if I unmute this, then I have to mute the. I have to mute the room. Yeah. It's obvious how to do this. It's not that obvious. You know what? I don't want to waste the last. No. It's just the audio. If I have to, the audio right now is coming from the room mic. We have to make that stop so that I can
Do this. Otherwise, this starts happening. So we need to mute the room
to make this work. It's not how it works because this is a separate piece of software. I think it's doing the room audio stuff. Or oh, maybe I can just mute him. Will that work?
Who's the host?
Well, he is. Rick.
I didn't see him up there.
Rick.
Rick's in the choirs.
Well, I know he's in the corner.
He might have spent a century.
Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna not deal with this right now.
Move it to the next time.
Yeah, I think I'll just have to defer that to the next time because this is not clicking over as smoothly as I thought. I'm not sure how to mute the room mic to keep this thing from feedback. So I'll just skip ahead to the next thing here. Okay, so one of the so one more of her talking points that we could look at is the subject of Oliver North. So, I mean, for most of us, at least for me, Oliver North had this, flash of fame and, kicking ass and taking names against the Senate, against the U.S. Congress. And then kind of disappeared, but apparently he remained a very big figure in white evangelical circles. They saw him as a hero. And so, I mean, I think people will probably hear or will have to remember the basic story. I mean, he fought in Vietnam and all that stuff, and then in the Reagan administration, he was involved with the whole arms, illegal arms deals and all that kind of stuff. And so, I'm just curious. I mean, for folks in this room, did you perceive Oliver North as a hero? Yeah, maybe he was bending the rules a little bit, but he was doing what had to be done for because communism was such a great evil. Mostly agree about that now. Okay, so we have to do whatever it takes to stomp out that evil. So on the one hand, on the other, there's a law. And was it okay? Was this a case where it was okay for this person to violate the law? Any thoughts?
Well, I think the fact that he was doing it in part for political advantage, so that the hostages fight around arms makes it. Can you hear? It's not even complicated. That it was clearly a problem.
That would certainly be my opinion. And yet, are there other thoughts on that, on the subject of Oliver North? In evangelical circles, I mean, there was a time, she talks about in the book, where there was a sort of a flurry of fame where, you know, people were naming sandwiches after Oliver North in delis, you know, lean red meat, you know, sandwiches and stuff like that. But after that little flurry of fame faded from pop culture, he remained a force in white evangelical circles. You know, sought after as a speaker and stuff like that, considered very motivational to them. And so, why is that? What? I mean, that's the. I think that's the analyzing question is why does that appeal so much? And so it's. If one of your defining virtues is law and order, there's a lot in conservative circles, law and order, but not always. Right? So there is. I mean, I think. My own take on it. You know, talking about my aversion to these kinds of testosterone overload, adrenaline overload movies. I think people's judgment is getting swayed by that kind of stuff, by those kinds of emotions. Is my view of it, and I just wonder, others have some thoughts different.
I think you're right with the emotional pull. It's definitely the emotional pull. That's what I was talking about, either the trauma, the feeling of being the outsider or the underdog, the feel of the politics of resentment. It's very strong because it's such an easy answer. So if you don't have to do the personal work, you kind of just have this place that makes you feel good. It's like escapism for a lot of things. It's different for lots of people, but that's why I think it appeals to so many different types of people, even though they have different values and different backgrounds. My family's obviously not white evangelical, but that's why I was confused when there was this whole thing about the white evangelical. I'm like, well, what exactly is that? I'm like, oh, there's a lot of stuff that I do understand about that.
I think the big contrast was that there are Black churches that have very similar theological formulations. If you talk about the theological axis, so I think that's why she labels it as white evangelical. Yeah.
It's definitely complicated because it does, but I think that because they worked at Blue for decades and they have this messaging that gives really nice, easy answers to a complicated world. And so when you don't understand it all or you don't have the time to really, it's just so like, I don't know, and there's this and there's that, and people don't like to be in that place of discomfort or not knowing. It makes them feel uncomfortable or sometimes stupid, like I don't understand it. And so to have someone come in with this authority and the answers, and you're like, yes, of course that's the right way to be, and then the hypocrisy that goes along with it.
Yeah, simple answers to hard questions.
But it's like you just kind of put the blinders on. So never mind all that. I have my path. It's good for me. Can I just believe it?
And I know I go to heaven if I do what I'm told.
In a sense, yeah. So yeah.
And so after World War II, there was the Nuremberg trials, right? And so the Nuremberg defense was, I was only following orders. I was a good, loyal soldier. I followed orders. If I correctly executed the orders I was given, I am blameless. And the world said, you are not blameless if you're following an immoral order. Right? Have we lost that? As that World War II generations? Absolutely. Have we lost that distinction?
General Norton was talking about it.
Right? But I'm just wondering if in the pop culture, more broadly,
But we're two cultures now. And we've got one culture that says, you were trying to stop my hero Donald Trump from doing whatever he wanted, even starting a nuclear war with China. And so you did something very bad.
you were disloyal.
Yeah.
By
The other culture says, geez, war.
Our is to do it, there are guardrails.
I can't follow him.
Right, right. Now, the order wasn't given,
No,
but, yeah. So I guess we're just about out of time for this episode. So I'll try to get the toggling back and forth to the videos a little more smoothly next time. Because I really do like the way that she presents some of this material and some of the stuff, the things she agonized with in the process of writing these materials. So, okay, so I think that'll do it for today. Sure.
So, I can take 1 minute out and tell you what's coming up for the next 8 weeks, if you'd like to do that. So we know what's gonna happen next Sunday. The following Sunday, October 17th, is the start of Medicare enrollment, the annual enrollment. So we will have back Vince Kelly once again to deal with what are the changes that are occurring, what are your choices, and to give broad advice. So the following Sunday, October 27th and 24th, Afghanistan Lessons Learned by Alden Munson, who is quite well connected with the State Department and the Department of Defense. October 31st, Halloween morning, that is open, not yet settled. The following, November 7th, Reverend Myra Brown from Rochester, New York, I believe. We'll be talking about Black churches.
That's Frank's friend?
Yes, yes, Frank Hansel has set that up. The following Sunday, November 14th, we were having a woman from the State Department, a diplomat, talk to us, being set up by Rich Sundin. He met her through UFC. I don't know the topic yet. He does not know the topic. We will know that within days. November 21st, Tatenda Johnson, Jerry and Tatenda. She has written a book, Pam Cook, our Pam Cook. They played a role in bringing that together. And a book about her life in Africa and she's accomplished working with kids, street kids. And I'm told it's a very moving book. Anyway, Tatenda will be talking about her life to this point, trying with a primary focus on working with urban kids in Africa. And it's apparently going to be quite moving. The following Sunday is the 4-day weekend with Thanksgiving. The December 5th, the topic will be the Supreme Court has been transformed by the last administration. We're filling 3 vacancies. Mike Zorro, who knows the Supreme Court quite well, will be our speaker. So.
Thank you, Jim. That sounds wonderful.